My father slid a piece of paper across the kitchen table like it was already settled. $47,000, he said. For your brother's wedding, you have more than enough sitting in that account, and this family needs it. My mother nodded. Daniel smiled at his phone, not even looking up. I did not cry. I did not argue. I picked up the paper, folded it once, and set it back down in front of him. I'll give you 2 days, I said. What none of them knew, what they could not have known, was that the account they were so certain belonged to them had been entirely, legally, and irrevocably mine since I turned 21. And what was sitting in it was not $47,000 anymore. Before I tell you what happened next, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever been treated like the family ATM, while someone else got to be the favorite. My name is Lauren Mitchell. I am 32 years old. I am a certified public accountant at a mid-sized private auditing firm in Stamford, Connecticut, and I have spent the better part of my adult life being very good at two things: reading numbers and knowing when to stay quiet. I grew up in a 5-bedroom colonial in Fairfield County. The kind of neighborhood where the lawns are always edged, the cars are always washed, and everyone's financial problems are hidden behind very clean windows. My parents, Richard and Diane Mitchell, were not wealthy in the way people imagine when they hear Fairfield County. They were appearance wealthy. Country club membership, yearly vacations to the Outer Banks, a kitchen renovation in 2009 that they were still paying off in 2019. The kind of family that looked completely fine from the outside and was quietly drowning on the inside. I figured that out when I was 19. Not because anyone told me, because I started paying attention to numbers, and numbers do not lie. But I am getting ahead of myself. Daniel is 4 years older than me. He was always the son that our family orbited. My parents talk about him the way people talk about a limited edition, like he arrived with a certificate of rarity, and the rest of us were just fortunate to be in the same room. When Daniel wanted to go to prep school, they found the money. When Daniel wanted a car for his 16th birthday, there was a red Jeep in the driveway on a Sunday morning. When Daniel dropped out of his first college after a year and a half, it was reframed as him finding his path. When he enrolled in a second school 3 years later, they paid for that too. I got a library card and a part-time job at a sandwich shop on Route 1. I do not say this to sound bitter. I say it because it is accurate, and because the story I am about to tell you does not make sense unless you understand the operating system of the Mitchell family. There were 2 sets of rules, one for Daniel, one for everyone else, which, in practice, meant one for me. I got a full academic scholarship to the University of Connecticut. My parents told people at the country club that they were so proud. What they did not mention was that they had contributed exactly nothing to my education. What they also did not mention, what I did not find out until much later, was that the college fund in my name, the $47,000 that my maternal grandmother, Eleanor, had set up as a uniform transfers to Minors Act account when I was 3 years old, had been sitting in a brokerage account this entire time, growing quietly. The way good investments do when you leave them alone for nearly 3 decades. My grandmother Eleanor died when I was 17. She was a sharp woman, retired bookkeeper, Depression-era pragmatist, the kind of person who kept her important documents in a fireproof lockbox and told no one where the key was until she was ready. Before she died, she called me into her bedroom at the hospice and told me 3 things. First, that I was the only one in the family who had her eyes. Second, that she had set up an account for me when I was small, and that it was mine, not my parents', mine, and that when I turned 21 the law would make that official. Third, that I should find a good attorney and not tell anyone about it until I needed to. I was 17 and grieving, and I filed all of that away in the back of my mind. At 21, I found the attorney. Her name was Patricia Voss, and she had handled my grandmother's estate. She walked me through the UTMA structure in about 40 minutes over bad coffee in her office in New Haven, and by the end of it I understood 2 things clearly. 1, the account was legally mine. My parents had no claim, no access, and no authority over it whatsoever. 2, my parents almost certainly did not know this. They had probably assumed, the way people assume things they want to be true, that they retained some kind of parental oversight over the funds indefinitely. They did not. I did not correct that assumption. Not right away. I was 21 and just starting out, and I did not yet know what I was going to need that account for. So I left it where it was, transferred management to a brokerage I selected myself, and started making conservative decisions with the money the way Patricia and I had discussed. Index funds mostly, a small allocation to real estate investment trusts. I reinvested every dividend. I did not touch the principal. I also did not tell my parents. I went to work. I passed my CPA exam on the first attempt. I got a job, then a better job, then the job I have now. I built a life that was entirely mine, paid for with money I had earned, in an apartment I rented with my own paycheck. My parents came to my place for dinner twice in 5 years. Both times my mother commented on how small it was. By the time I was 32 and sitting at that kitchen table on a Tuesday night in October, listening to my father explain that my brother's wedding venue deposit was due in 11 days and that the family needed me to step up, the account my grandmother had started with $47,000 when I was 3 years old had grown to just over $340,000. My father did not know that number. My mother did not know that number. Daniel, who was sitting across from me scrolling through something on his phone while his parents tried to extract 6 figures from his younger sister, definitely did not know that number. I knew it. I had known it for 11 years, and I had spent those 11 years being very, very patient. The dinner had been my mother's idea. She called it a family check-in, which should have been my first warning. Diane Mitchell did not do casual. Every gathering she organized had an agenda, and the agenda was always announced somewhere between the salad and the main course. When everyone was seated and the exits felt socially inconvenient, she made pot roast. That was the second warning. Pot roast was her concession food, the meal she cooked when she needed something from you and wanted you to feel warm and obligated before she asked. I drove out to Fairfield on a Tuesday evening in the second week of October. The leaves were turning, and the neighborhood looked the way it always did in fall, expensive and composed, every front yard a quiet argument that everything here was fine. I parked in the driveway behind Daniel's black BMW, which still had the temporary plates on it. He'd bought it 4 months ago. I had not asked who helped with the down payment. Courtney was there too. Daniel's fiancée of 8 months, a woman who had the particular talent of making every room feel like an audition she expected to win. She was 30, bright-smiled, and had opinions about table settings that she delivered with the confidence of someone who had never once been told no. She kissed my cheek at the door and told me she loved my coat. I said thank you. We had that exchange every time we saw each other, and both of us knew it meant nothing. Dinners was pleasant in the performed way that Mitchell family dinners were always pleasant. My father asked about work. I told him it was going well. My mother asked if I was seeing anyone, which was her way of asking why I wasn't married yet, which was her way of reminding me that Daniel had figured that part out and I hadn't. Courtney talked about the wedding venue, Riverside Manor. A restored estate property 40 minutes outside the city, with a ceremony space that held 200 and a catering minimum that I happened to know started at $18,000. I listened, I ate. I kept my face neutral, the pot roast was cleared. My mother brought out a store-bought apple pie and cut it into 6 slices with the precision of someone stalling. My father poured himself a second glass of wine. Daniel finally put his phone face down on the table, which meant we had arrived at the part of the evening that required his attention. My father cleared his throat. "Lauren," he said, "we wanted to talk to you about something as a family." I set my fork down. He explained it the way he explained most things, with the tone of a man who had already decided the outcome and was now just reading the verdict aloud. The wedding was in March. The venue deposit was due in 11 days, $22,000, non-refundable. Between the deposit, the catering, the photographer, the flowers, the rehearsal dinner, the honeymoon, they were looking at somewhere between $85,000 and $95,000 total. They had planned to cover it, he said, but some unexpected expenses had come up this year. Nothing to worry about, just a temporary gap. He slid the paper across the table. "Your college fund has $47,000 in it," he said. "We've always considered that a family asset. We need you to release it." The word release landed in the room like he had used it 100 times in his own head and had decided it was neutral, clinical. Like releasing funds was something families did all the time, like returning a library book. Courtney was looking at her pie. Daniel was looking at the table. My mother was looking at me with an expression she had perfected over 32 years. The one that said, "Don't make this difficult, Lauren." I looked at my father. I thought about the UTMA filing. I thought about Patricia Voss and the 40 minutes over bad coffee in New Haven. I thought about 11 years of index funds and reinvested dividends, and a number that was now $340,000 and belonged entirely, legally, irrevocably to me. I thought about Daniel's Jeep, the prep school, the 2 college tuitions, the BMW with the temporary plates. I picked up the paper, I folded it once, cleanly, along the center. I set it back down in front of my father. "I'll give you 2 days," I said. My mother's expression shifted, just slightly, a loosening around the eyes, like relief was already arriving early. She thought I meant I needed 2 days to process the transfer, to arrange the paperwork, to do the daughterly thing I had always eventually done, which was comply. Daniel looked up from the table for the first time all evening. He gave me a small nod. The nod of a man who had never once in 36 years of living been surprised by the outcome of a family negotiation. I picked up my purse. I said goodnight to everyone individually, calmly, by name. I kissed my mother on the cheek. I shook my father's hand, which I had not done since I was a child, and which made him blink. I told Courtney the wedding was going to be beautiful. Then I walked out the front door, got in my car, and drove home through the dark Connecticut roads, with the heat on low and the radio off. I did not cry. Not once. Not even close. I had work to do. I got home at 9:40. I poured myself a glass of water, not wine, water, because I needed my head completely clear, and I sat down at my kitchen table with my laptop and a legal pad and I started making a list. This is what I do when other people panic. I make lists. I organize. I build a structure around the problem until it stops feeling like a crisis and starts feeling like a project. It is the same thing I do at work when a client's books are a disaster. I do not react to the mess, I map it first. You cannot fix what you cannot see clearly. The first thing I wrote down was Patricia Voss's name and phone number, which I had memorized years ago, the way you memorize the number of someone you hope you never need to call urgently, but know someday you might. The second thing I wrote down was the number $340,218, the actual balance as of that morning, to the dollar. The third thing I wrote down was a question: what do they actually know? This is the part that most people would have skipped. Most people, when confronted with what had just happened at that dinner table, would have gone straight to anger or straight to action. They would have called a friend, sent a furious text, lain awake running the argument through their head 100 times. I understand that impulse, I have felt it, but I have also learned slowly, over years of working with numbers and contracts and people who made expensive mistakes, that the most dangerous thing you can do in a high-stakes situation is move before you understand the full shape of what you're dealing with. So I sat with the question: what did Richard and Diane Mitchell actually know about that account? They knew my grandmother had set it up. They knew the original amount, $47,000, which was the figure my father had cited at dinner, which told me they had not checked the balance recently. They believed, almost certainly, that they had some form of parental authority over the funds, or at minimum that I would not know enough to challenge them on it. They did not know I had spoken to Patricia Voss 11 years ago. They did not know I had taken over management of the account at 21. They did not know the balance had grown to $340,000. And they did not know that I had, in the course of doing some estate paperwork for a former client 18 months ago, pulled a routine credit report on the Mitchell family property as part of a broader asset review I'd been asked to conduct. That last part requires some explanation. 14 months before that Tuesday dinner, I had been hired briefly, 3 months, a contained engagement, by a small investment group that was doing due diligence on a portfolio of Connecticut properties. One of those properties, through a chain of ownership transfers I had not anticipated, was adjacent to a parcel my father had refinanced. In the course of the standard review, I had seen the Mitchell family's mortgage documentation. I was not looking for it. I was not snooping. It was in the file, and it was my job to read the file. What I saw stopped me cold. My parents had refinanced their Fairfield home in 2021. The new mortgage balance was $612,000 on a house that appraised at $790,000 in a market that had since softened. More than that, they had taken out a home equity line of credit in early 2023, drawn it down almost entirely, and were carrying a combined debt load of just over $180,000 beyond the primary mortgage. The monthly obligations, when I did the math, consumed approximately 68% of my father's income from his regional sales management position, which had not come with a raise in 3 years. I had sat with that information for 14 months. I had not called my parents. I had not mentioned it. I had filed it away in the same mental cabinet where I kept everything else I knew and did not yet need to use. Now I needed to use it, because here was the thing about that dinner, the thing that changed the entire character of the situation. My parents were not asking me to contribute to a celebration. They were asking me to bail out a family that was quietly, methodically going broke, using a wedding as the justification, targeting an account that was not legally theirs to target. That was not a family request. That was a financial maneuver. And I knew exactly how to respond to financial maneuvers. I called Patricia Voss at 7:45 the next morning. She picked up on the third ring, which told me she still kept early hours, which made me like her all over again. I explained the situation in under 4 minutes. She asked two clarifying questions. Then she was quiet for a moment and I could hear her writing something down. "Lauren," she said, "they have no legal claim to that account. They never did. You've known that since you were 21, I know," I said. "But I want it documented. I want a letter. And I want to know what our options are if they try to move on this without my consent." She told me she'd have a draft to me by end of day. She also mentioned, almost as an aside, that any attempt by a third party to access or pressure the transfer of a UTMA account after the beneficiary had reached the age of majority could constitute financial coercion depending on how it was executed. She said this the way she said most things, matter-of-factly, without drama, like she was reading from a manual. I wrote the word coercion on my legal pad and underlined it once. I had given my parents 2 days. Not because I needed 2 days to decide anything. I had decided 11 years ago, sitting in Patricia Voss's office with bad coffee going cold on the desk between us, that this account was mine and that I would protect it. What I needed 2 days for was something else entirely. I needed them to send the email. People like my father, organized, entitled, certain of outcomes, always put things in writing eventually. They send the formal request, the summary of the conversation, the next steps email. It is the behavior of someone who believes the paperwork is a formality rather than a record. I had watched clients do it 100 times. They document their own overreach because they genuinely cannot conceive that the documentation will one day be used against them. I checked my email at 11 p.m. before I went to sleep. Nothing yet, but I was not worried. I had given them 2 days. The email would come. I turned off the light and slept better than I had in months. Patricia Voss sent the draft letter at 4:53 in the afternoon, which meant she had spent most of her day on it, which meant she understood that this was not a routine matter. I read it twice at my desk with the door to my office closed, and then I read it a third time because it was that good. It was 4 pages, clean, precise, the kind of legal prose that carries no wasted words. Every sentence a load-bearing wall. It opened with a summary of the UTMA account structure as established by my grandmother Eleanor's estate in 1994. It cited the specific Connecticut statute governing the transfer of custodial assets to beneficiaries upon reaching the age of majority. It confirmed, with reference to account documentation and brokerage records, that Lauren Christine Mitchell had assumed sole and complete legal authority over the account on her 21st birthday, and that no other party, including biological parents or legal guardians of the former minor, retained any claim, access, or decision-making authority over said account from that date forward. Then it got to the part I had asked Patricia to include specifically. It noted that any attempt to compel, pressure, or coerce the account holder into transferring funds through familial obligation, implicit threat, or misrepresentation of legal standing could constitute financial coercion under Connecticut civil statute, and that documentation of such attempts had been preserved. I saved the letter to 2 places, my work server and a personal encrypted drive I kept at my apartment. Then I forwarded it to my personal email with the subject line, "For reference, now." Let me tell you about the account itself, because this is the part of the story that I have never told anyone in full, and I think you deserve to understand it. My grandmother Eleanor started the UTMA account in March of 1994, 3 months after I was born, with an initial deposit of $12,000. Money she had saved over 40 years of careful, unglamorous bookkeeping work. She added to it periodically, $1,000 here after a good year, $500 at Christmas. By the time she died in 2005, the account held $47,000 in a conservative mix of mutual funds and treasury bonds, managed by a mid-tier brokerage in New Haven that charged fees my grandmother would have considered reasonable, and I, by 2010, considered excessive. When I took over management at 21, the first thing I did was transfer the account to a low-cost index brokerage. The second thing I did was restructure the allocation: 70% broad market index, 20% international index, 10% real estate investment trusts. All dividends reinvested automatically. I did not touch the principal. Not once. Not for a new car, not for a security deposit, not for any of the hundred small financial pressures of being a young woman, building a life from scratch without family money. I treated that account like it did not exist for spending purposes because my grandmother had told me it was not for spending. She had told me it was for when I needed it most. I used to wonder, in my 20s, what that moment would look like. I imagined a medical emergency, a layoff, some unforeseen disaster that required a financial cushion I could not build fast enough on my own salary. I did not imagine it would look like a Tuesday pot roast dinner in Fairfield with my brother's fiancée smiling into her apple pie while my father slid a piece of paper across the table. But here we are, by October of that year. The account had been compounding for 28 years. 28 years of broad market growth, reinvested dividends, and zero withdrawals. The balance when I checked it the morning after the dinner was $340, 218 and some cents that I will round down because the cents feel almost beside the point. My parents believed it held $47,000. That was the number my grandmother had told them. Once, at some point when I was a child, in a conversation I was not present for, they had never asked me about it directly. They had never requested a statement. They had, I think, held that number in their minds for nearly 30 years the way people hold on to an old piece of information they have no reason to update, passively, automatically, certain it was still accurate because it had never been contradicted. The gap between what they believed was in that account and what was actually in it was $293,000. I want you to sit with that number for a moment. $293,000. That is the amount my parents did not know existed. That is the amount that 11 years of patience and my grandmother's Depression-era discipline had quietly built, while the Mitchell family went on believing. I was the daughter who had nothing of value to contribute. Here is what a CPA understands that most people do not. Money kept private is money kept safe. The moment you disclose an asset to someone who believes they have a claim on it, you have changed the negotiation entirely. I had never disclosed this account to anyone in my family. Not Daniel. Not my parents. Not a cousins at Christmas. Not in a moment of vulnerability. Not accidentally. 11 years of absolute silence on a number that had grown to $340,000. That silence was not accidental. It was architectural, and now, for the first time, I was going to use it. I closed my laptop at 6:15, put on my coat, and walked the 4 blocks from my office to the parking garage in the early October dark. The air smelled like wood smoke and exhaust, and something faintly sweet from the bakery on the corner. I stood at the crosswalk and watched the light change and thought about my grandmother Eleanor, who had kept her important documents in a fireproof lockbox and told no one where the key was until she was ready. She had been ready when it mattered. I checked my phone before I got in the car. My father's email had arrived at 5:47. The email was 3 paragraphs long. My father had written it the way he wrote everything. Declarative sentences, no contractions, the tone of a man who confused confidence with authority. He opened by summarizing the conversation from Tuesday dinner. For clarity, he described the college fund as a family resource established for Lauren's educational benefit, the educational phase of which has concluded. He noted that the family was facing a short-term liquidity gap and that Lauren's contribution would allow the family to move forward with Daniel's wedding plans without disruption. The second paragraph outlined the transfer mechanics. He wanted $47,000 moved to a joint account he and my mother held at a bank in Westport within 5 business days. He had included the routing number and account number. He said he assumed I would handle the paperwork given my professional background, which was the closest my father had ever come to acknowledging my career in writing. The third paragraph was the one that mattered. It said, and I am going to be precise here because precision is important. We trust you understand that this is not optional, Lauren. This is what families do. The money was always meant to support this family, and we expect you to honor that, not optional. I forwarded the email to Patricia Voss with a single line. This is the documentation I mentioned, she replied within 20 minutes. Perfect. I'll have the cease and desist ready by Friday. I set my phone face down on the kitchen counter and made dinner. Pasta simple, the kind of meal you make when you want your hands occupied and your mind free. I was not angry reading that email, or rather, I was angry in the way you are angry at a weather system. Impersonal. Acknowledged. Moved through. What I was, more than anything, was ready. The first call came the next morning at 8:14. My mother. I let it go to voicemail. She did not leave one. Which meant she had called to gauge whether I would pick up, not to say anything specific. This is a technique my mother had used my entire life. The reconnaissance call, designed to establish contact and assess tone before committing to an actual conversation. I had learned to recognize it by the time I was 12. She called again at 8:41. Then at 9:03. At 9:30 I was in a client meeting and my phone was face down. By the time I checked it at 11, there were 2 text messages. The first said, "Lauren, please call me back when you get a chance. We just want to talk through the logistics." The second, sent 18 minutes later, said, "This is important and time sensitive. The deposit deadline is in 9 days." At noon, while I was eating lunch at my desk, my mother arrived at my office building. I know this because my assistant Maya knocked on my door and said, with the careful expression of someone delivering complicated news, that there was a woman in the lobby who said she was my mother and wanted to know if I had a few minutes. Maya is 26 and professionally diplomatic, and I could tell from her face that my mother had already been, in some way I could not yet quantify. A lot. I told Maya to let her up. Diane Mitchell walked into my office at 12:17 on a Wednesday in October and looked around the room the way she always looked at spaces I inhabited, assessing, measuring, finding them slightly insufficient. She sat down across from my desk without being invited to and put her handbag on her lap and looked at me with an expression that had several layers to it, the topmost being concern, and the ones beneath being pressure dressed up as concern. "Lauren," she said, "I don't understand why you're making this so complicated." I did not say anything. I find that silence, deployed correctly, does more work than words in most conversations. She told me that the family had been through a difficult year. That my father's division had restructured and his bonus had not come through the way they'd planned. That they had committed to Riverside Manor in good faith, and that Courtney's parents were expecting the Mitchell family to hold up their end of the financial arrangement. That Daniel was finally settling down, finally building something real, and that this was what families did. That they showed up for each other. She said the phrase, "This is what families do," twice in the same conversation. Apparently, it was the Mitchell family talking point for the week. I listened to all of it. I kept my face neutral and my hands still on the desk in front of me. I thought about the routing number my father had included in his email. I thought about the word coercion underlined on my legal pad. When she finished, I said, "Mom, I hear you. I'm handling it." Her face shifted. That loosening again, the same relief I had seen at the dinner table. Handling it sounded like compliance. It was meant to. She stood up, smoothed her coat, and told me she knew I would do the right thing. She said it warmly. Like a reward for good behavior, issued slightly prematurely. I walked her to the elevator. I watched the doors close. I went back to my office and closed the door and sat down and stared at the middle distance for approximately 90 seconds. Then I opened my calendar and blocked off the following Saturday. Courtney's bridal shower was being held at the Fairfield Country Club at 2 in the afternoon. My mother had sent the invitation 6 weeks ago. I had RSVP'd yes before any of this happened, and I had not changed my RSVP. I was still going. I had always been going. The shower was never the problem, the shower was the solution. That evening, Daniel texted me for the first time since the dinner. The message was 8 words. "Lauren, don't do this to our family, please." I read it once. I did not reply. What I did instead was call Patricia and confirm the timeline. The cease and desist letter would be ready by Friday. The account documentation, brokerage statements, the original UTMA filing, the transfer of management records from my 21st birthday had already been compiled into a single PDF that ran to 19 pages. 19 pages of evidence that this money had been mine, managed by me, grown by me, for 11 years. I asked Patricia one more question before I hung up. If I wanted to present this documentation in a public setting, I said, in front of witnesses, "Is there any reason not to?" She was quiet for a second. Then she said, "Lauren, the documentation speaks for itself wherever you present it. The more witnesses, the clearer the record." I thanked her and ended the call. 9 days until the venue deposit deadline. 5 days until the bridal shower. I had everything I needed. I had had everything I needed for 11 years. All that remained now was the room full of witnesses. Thursday started quietly. No calls from my mother before 9, which was unusual enough that I noticed it the way you notice when a noise you've grown accustomed to suddenly stops. My father sent no follow-up email. Daniel went silent after his 8-word text the night before. I went to work, reviewed a client's quarterly statements, ate lunch at my desk, and spent the afternoon drafting a memo on depreciation schedules that required my complete attention and got it. The quiet lasted until 4:45. That was when my cousin Rebecca texted me. Rebecca is 35, lives in Westport, and occupies the particular family role of person who means well, but cannot keep anything to herself for longer than 48 hours. Her text said, "Hey, just checking in. Heard things are a little tense with your parents? Hope you're okay." I stared at that message for a long moment. My mother had made calls. This is the Mitchell family's secondary maneuver, the one that follows the direct approach when the direct approach stalls. When Richard and Diane cannot get what they want from you head on, they go around, they call the relatives. They frame the situation carefully, not as coercion, never as coercion, but as concern, as family worry, as Lauren is going through something, and we're not sure she's thinking clearly. They build a perimeter of social pressure around you and then wait for it to do the work that direct confrontation couldn't. I had watched them do this to my father's sister Margaret in 2016 over a dispute about my grandmother's china. I had watched them do it to my cousin Paul in 2019 when he didn't come home for Christmas. I had watched the machinery of it operate my entire life from the position of someone who was never the target. Now I was the target. I texted Rebecca back. "I'm fine, thank you for checking in." I kept it warm, no details, no defensiveness. Nothing that could be quoted or relayed or gently misrepresented. Then I opened a new note on my phone and wrote down that the family outreach campaign had begun on Thursday at 4:45, 36 hours after my mother's visit to my office. I documented everything now. Not obsessively, I was not following my mother around with a recording device, but consistently. Texts screenshotted, emails forwarded to Patricia, a running note on my phone with timestamps. A CPA's habit, applied to a family situation. If it happened, it went in the record. Friday brought 3 things. The first was Patricia's cease and desist letter, which arrived in my inbox at 8:02 in the morning and was exactly what I had asked for. 4 pages. Formal, unambiguous, citing the UTMA statute, the account documentation, and the email my father had sent on Wednesday evening in specific terms. It named Richard Allen Mitchell and Diane Carol Mitchell by full legal name. It stated clearly that any further attempts to pressure, coerce, or misrepresent legal authority over Lauren Christine Mitchell's personal financial accounts would be met with civil action. It requested that all further communication regarding this matter be directed to Patricia Voss's office. I did not send it yet. I filed it in the same encrypted folder as the account documentation and the PDF Patricia had compiled, and my father's Wednesday email. I was building something, and a cease and desist, sent too early, was a warning that gave people time to adjust their behavior. I did not want them to adjust their behavior. I wanted their behavior on the record intact, exactly as it was. The second thing Friday brought was my father's attempt to contact the brokerage directly. I know this because the brokerage called me at 10:15. A customer service representative named Jason, professional and slightly uncomfortable, told me that someone identifying himself as my father had called that morning, requesting information about an account in my name, citing parental authority. Jason said the call had been flagged because the account holder was clearly an adult with sole ownership and there was no third-party authorization on file. He wanted to let me know as a courtesy that the request had been denied and documented. I thanked Jason. I asked him to send me written confirmation of the contact attempt and the denial. He said he would have it to me by end of day. I added it to the folder. This was the moment I understood that my father was no longer operating from confidence. He was operating from desperation. A confident man does not call a brokerage and cite parental authority over a 32-year-old woman's account. A desperate man does. A man who has done the math on his own financial situation, realized that the $47.00 he believed was accessible was the only number in his current landscape that looked like a solution, and started pulling every lever available to him, regardless of whether the levers were attached to anything real. The third thing Friday brought was Courtney. She called me at 7 in the evening from what sounded like a restaurant, background noise of glasses and conversation behind her voice. She opened with pleasantries, asked about my week, said she was so excited I was coming to the shower Saturday. Then she shifted. "Lauren, I just want you to know, she said, with the careful warmth of someone who had rehearsed the sentence, that Daniel and I are so grateful for everything your family's doing for this wedding. It really means the world to us. It was a pressure play disguised as gratitude, a reminder that expectations existed, that she was monitoring whether those expectations were being met, delivered with plausible deniability wrapped in a compliment. Of course, I said. It's a big day. I'm looking forward to Saturday, she said, wonderful, she'd see me there. We hung up. I sat on my couch for a few minutes in the quiet of my apartment, listening to the street sounds coming through the window. A car, someone's music, the particular ambient hum of a city that has no idea what is happening in your living room. I thought about all the pressure that had been applied in the last 4 days. The calls, the visit, the cousin outreach, the brokerage contact, Courtney's performance over restaurant noise, every lever pulled, every angle worked, none of it had moved me 1 inch, because here is what they did not understand, what they had perhaps never understood about me in 32 years. I do not make decisions under pressure. I make them in advance carefully, with full information, and then I hold them. The pressure that was meant to wear me down was landing on a position I had established 11 years ago in a law office in New Haven. You cannot erode bedrock by pouring water on it. Saturday morning I woke at 6:30. I showered, made coffee, and sat at my kitchen table for an hour in the early quiet, going through the folder one more time. The UTMA documentation, the brokerage statements, the cease and desist, my father's email with its routing number, and its phrase, "This is not optional." The brokerage's written confirmation of my father's failed contact attempt, which had arrived Friday at 4:50 as promised, 19 pages of documentation. Plus 4 more, 23 pages total, printed cleanly, organized with tabs, placed in a cream-colored folder I had bought at the office supply store on my lunch break Friday. I put on a navy dress, a coat I liked, and the small gold earrings my grandmother Eleanor had left me. I drank the last of my coffee standing at the window, looking at the Saturday morning street. Then I picked up the folder, put it in my bag, and drove to Fairfield. The Fairfield Country Club on a Saturday in October is a particular kind of beautiful. The kind that has been maintained rather than discovered, manicured into permanence by decades of membership dues and landscaping contracts. The oaks along the front drive had gone fully amber, and the parking lot was already half full when I arrived at 1:45. I sat in my car for 3 minutes, not because I was nervous, because I wanted to be precise about when I walked in 1:48. 15 minutes before the shower was scheduled to begin, when the room would be filling but not yet full, when people were still finding seats and greeting each other, and the social architecture of the afternoon had not yet solidified into something harder to interrupt, I checked the folder in my bag one more time. Everything in order, tabbed, exactly where I had placed it Friday evening. I had read through it so many times by now that I could have recited the Connecticut UTMA statute from memory, which is not a skill most people need, and which I found in that moment quietly satisfying. I got out of the car and walked in. The shower was being held in the club's garden room, a long, light-filled space with tall windows overlooking the 18th hole, round tables set with white linens and centerpieces of white roses and eucalyptus. Courtney's aesthetic telegraphed in every detail. There were perhaps 40 women already present when I arrived. My mother's friends, Courtney's mother, and her contingent from Greenwich, various aunts and cousins and country club acquaintances who existed in that particular layer of my family social life that my parents maintained carefully and I had always found exhausting. My mother saw me from across the room and her face did something complicated, relief, calculation, and something underneath both of those that I can only describe as premature victory. The expression of a woman who had decided that my presence confirmed her interpretation of events, that I was here, dressed nicely, with a smile on my face, meant that I had decided to cooperate, that the 2 days had passed and Lauren, as Lauren always eventually did, had come around. She crossed the room and hugged me. "I'm so glad you're here," she said into my ear. "Everything's going to be fine." "Yes," I said. "It is." I found a seat at a table near the center of the room, not the back, not hidden, and set my bag on the chair beside me. I said hello to my Aunt Carol, who was seated to my left, and who asked about my job with genuine interest, which I appreciated. I accepted a glass of sparkling water from a passing server. I watched the room fill. Courtney arrived at 2:05, in a white dress with a bow at the shoulder, and the room made the sounds rooms make when the guest of honor appears. A collective brightening, a shift in attention, the particular social energy of an event that has been waiting for its center to arrive. She was luminous and rehearsed, and she hugged everyone with the precise warmth of a woman who had thought carefully about how she wanted to be perceived on this day. She hugged me last, which I do not think was an accident. "Lauren," she said, holding both my hands, "I am so glad you're here, truly. You have no idea how much it means to Daniel and me that the family is coming together for this, coming together." I noted the phrasing. "Of course," I said. "This is an important day." The shower proceeded the way showers proceed. Appetizers, a mimosa I did not drink, a game involving wedding trivia that Courtney won with the ease of someone who had prepared for it, gift opening, a long, performed sequence of unwrapping and exclaiming, and holding up kitchen items for the room to admire. My mother circulated with the smooth efficiency of a woman in her element, refilling glasses, facilitating introductions, presenting the best possible version of the Mitchell family to everyone assembled. I watched all of it and I waited. My moment came at 3:45. The gifts had been opened. The cake had been cut, white with pale green frosting, exactly what you would expect. The room had shifted into its final phase, the loose conversational drift of an event winding down, people standing in small clusters, the volume lower, the formality dissolving. My mother was standing with Courtney's mother, Patricia. Not my attorney Patricia, a different one, Courtney's mother from Greenwich, near the window. My Aunt Carol was talking to a woman I didn't recognize. Various cousins and club friends were dispersed around the room. I stood up, took the cream-colored folder from my bag, and walked to where my mother and Courtney's mother were standing. "Mom," I said, "I want to take care of the account matter now." While everyone's here, my mother's expression went through 3 changes in approximately 1 second. Surprise. Then the social calculation of whether this was appropriate, then something I can only describe as the beginning of unease, quickly suppressed. "Lauren, this isn't really the place," she started. "I think it is," I said pleasantly. "Dad sent me an email requesting a formal transfer. I want to respond to that formally, with family present." "That seems right." Courtney's mother Patricia was watching with polite, cautious interest. My Aunt Carol had turned from her conversation. 2 of my mother's friends nearby had gone quiet in the particular way that people go quiet when they sense that something real is about to happen in a room that was supposed to contain only pleasant things. I opened the folder. I had organized it deliberately. The first document on top was not the cease and desist. That was too aggressive for an opening, too adversarial before the room understood what was happening. The first document on top was the original UTMA account filing from 1994. My grandmother Eleanor's signature at the bottom of the page, the account number, the beneficiary name, Lauren Christine Mitchell, the custodian transfer clause, highlighted in yellow, that specified the beneficiary assumed sole control at 21 years of age. I set it on the table between us so that both my mother and Courtney's mother could see it. "This is the account my grandmother set up for me in 1994, I said, at a volume that was conversational but carried. "It's a UTMA account, which means that under Connecticut law, it transferred entirely to my control when I turned 21. That was 11 years ago. My parents have no legal claim to it. They never have." My mother's face had gone the color of the white tablecloth. "Lauren," she said. I turned to the second document, the brokerage statement, current balance. I placed it on the table beside the first. "The balance my father cited in his email was $47,000, I said. "That was the original amount my grandmother deposited. This is the current balance." Courtney's mother leaned forward slightly. She read the number. Something shifted in her face. A recalibration, quiet and immediate, the expression of a woman from Greenwich who understood exactly what a brokerage statement meant, and what the number on it represented, 340,218. My mother saw her look at it. She looked at it herself. For a moment she simply stood there, holding a glass of sparkling water, and the number sat on the table between us like a third person who had just walked into the conversation. I reached into the folder for the third document. "This," I said, "is the written record of my father's attempt to contact my brokerage directly on Friday morning, citing parental authority over my account. The brokerage denied the request and sent me this confirmation." The room, in the immediate vicinity of our small cluster, had gone almost entirely silent. I placed the cease and desist on the table last. I did not explain it. I did not need to. Patricia Voss's letterhead was clean and authoritative, and the word coercion appeared in the third paragraph in plain language that required no legal training to understand. I closed the folder. I wanted the family to have clarity, I said, about what this account is, who it belongs to, and what has happened this week. I thought it was important for everyone to understand. I looked at my mother when I said everyone. She was not looking at the documents anymore. She was looking at Courtney's mother. And Courtney's mother, the woman from Greenwich who had arrived today, expecting to plan a spring wedding at Riverside Manor, with a family that had its finances in order, was looking at the brokerage statement with an expression that I can only describe as the beginning of a very serious reconsideration. The silence lasted perhaps 4 seconds. In a room full of women, 4 seconds of complete silence is a long time. Then Courtney's mother, Patricia, set down her champagne flute with a small, precise click and said, "Excuse me for just a moment," and walked toward the far corner of the room where Courtney was standing with 2 of her bridesmaids, still holding a slice of wedding cake on a small white plate. I watched her go. I did not follow. My mother grabbed my arm just above the elbow. Her grip was tighter than I expected, not painful, but decisive. The grip of a woman who had lost control of a situation and was trying to physically reclaim it. She steered me 2 steps away from the table, toward the window, her back to the room. "What do you think you are doing?" she said. It was not a question. It had the flat, pressurized quality of a sentence that had run out of room for punctuation. "I'm providing documentation," I said. "The same way Dad did when he sent me an email with a routing number. That was a private family conversation." "Mom," I kept my voice level. "He put it in writing. With a routing number and a deadline. That is not a private conversation. That is a financial demand." She stared at me. In 32 years, I had watched my mother's face cycle through many expressions: disappointment, impatience, the particular tight-lipped look she got when she felt a social situation slipping out of her management. I had never seen what was on her face right now. It was something rawer than those. Something closer to the recognition that the version of events she had been operating from, the one where Lauren was difficult but manageable, where the money was accessible, where the wedding would proceed as planned, had just stopped being the version of events that existed. "You have humiliated this family," she said quietly. "I have documented the truth," I said. In front of people who were going to find out eventually anyway. She let go of my arm. Across the room, Courtney's mother had reached her daughter. I could not hear what was being said. The distance was too great, and the ambient noise of the room had resumed, conversations restarting in that slightly heightened way that happens when people are pretending not to be aware of something they are entirely aware of. But I could see Courtney's face. I watched it move through confusion, then a sharp attentiveness, then something that looked like the expression of a woman doing rapid arithmetic. Courtney looked at her mother. Her mother said something else. Courtney looked across the room at me, then at my mother, then back at her mother. Then she set the cake plate down on the nearest table and took her phone out of her pocket. My Aunt Carol appeared at my elbow. She is my father's sister, and she has always occupied an independent position in the family, not aligned with my parents, not opposed to them, simply herself, which in the Mitchell family required a particular kind of quiet stubbornness that I have always respected. "Lauren," she said softly, "are you all right?" "Yes," I said. "I'm fine." She looked at me for a moment with the evaluating expression of someone deciding whether to believe that. Then she nodded once and put her hand briefly on my shoulder and moved away. It was the smallest gesture, and it mattered more than she probably knew. The shower did not end immediately. These things never do. The social machinery of an event like this has momentum. People with plates of cake and half-finished mimosas do not simply leave because something uncomfortable has happened near the window. The afternoon continued in a muted, rearranged version of itself. Conversations resumed. The caterers cleared the dessert table. Someone put on quiet background music that no one had noticed until now, but the center of the room had shifted. Where Courtney had been, bright, performing, receiving, there was now a woman with her phone pressed to her ear, standing near the service door with her back to the room. Her mother stood beside her, not speaking, watching Courtney's face with the careful attention of a parent who has received new information and is waiting to understand what it means. My mother did not come back to me. She moved through the room on automatic, thanking people for coming, accepting compliments on the centerpieces, performing the role of gracious hostess with the mechanical precision of someone whose body knows the choreography, even when the mind is somewhere else entirely. I watched her do it and felt something I had not expected to feel in this room today, something I had not budgeted for emotionally, not triumph, not satisfaction, something quieter and sadder and more complicated than either of those. She was my mother. She had made the choices she had made over 32 years, and those choices had brought us here, to this room, on this Saturday in October. But she's still my mother. And watching her work the room on autopilot, holding everything together by force of social habit, while everything was coming apart, was not the clean, bright experience I had imagined it might be when I was making my list at the kitchen table on Tuesday night. I had not imagined the sad part. I should have. I stayed until 4:30. I said goodbye to my Aunt Carol, to two cousins I liked, to Courtney's bridesmaids who were standing in a confused cluster near the gift table. I found Courtney near the door. She looked at me with an expression I could not fully read, not hostile, not warm, somewhere in the complicated middle territory of a woman who has just received information that changes the shape of her near future and has not yet decided how she feels about the person who delivered it. Lauren, she said. Courtney, I said. I hope you have a beautiful wedding. I meant it. Not as a performance. Not as a parting shot. I meant it the way you can mean something for a person and still know that the circumstances around them have changed in ways that neither of you chose. She looked at me for another second. Then she said very quietly, My father is a CFO. I understood immediately what she meant. Her father was a CFO. He would look at the Mitchell family finances. He would find the $180,000 in debt, the drawn-down home equity line, the mortgage on a house in a softening market. He would understand, with the speed of someone who reads balance sheets for a living, exactly what he was looking at. I know, I said. She nodded once, slowly, and looked away. I walked out of the Fairfield Country Club at 4:31 on a Saturday afternoon in October. The air had gone cold since I'd arrived, properly cold now, the kind that carries the real promise of winter underneath it. The oaks along the front drive were still amber, but the light had shifted to that low, horizontal gold that only exists for about 40 minutes in late afternoon in New England. I sat in my car for a moment with the engine off. My phone buzzed. A text from my father. Lauren, call me right now. Then another 30 seconds later. What did you do? Then, 4 minutes after that, a call from Daniel that I let ring through to voicemail. I started the car. I turned the heat on. I pulled out of the parking lot and onto the road and drove north through the amber light, back toward the city, back toward my apartment and my kitchen table, and the life I had built entirely on my own, with my own money and my own decisions, and 11 years of absolute architectural silence. Behind me, in the garden room of the Fairfield Country Club, I knew that Courtney's father was probably already on the phone. I knew that certain questions were being asked that had not been asked before this afternoon. I knew that the version of events in which the Mitchell family was a financially stable, socially intact unit capable of hosting a $90 zeros and wedding at Riverside Manor in March was being examined with the particular scrutiny that CFs apply to numbers that do not add up. I did not feel victorious driving home. I felt clear. There is a difference, and it matters. Clarity is what you feel when you have told the truth to the right people at the right time with the right documentation, and there is nothing left to manage or protect or conceal. Clarity is what my grandmother Eleanor must have felt when she handed me those 3 pieces of information from her hospice bed and watched me understand them. I drove home through the amber light. My phone kept buzzing on the passenger seat. I did not look at it once. My father called 11 times between 4:31 and 7 o'clock that evening. I know the exact number because I counted them later, going through my call log with the same methodical attention I bring to any set of data that needs to be understood before it can be addressed. 11 calls in 2.5 hours. No voicemails after the first 2. The first was 22 seconds of my father saying my name and telling me to call him back. The second was 41 seconds of him saying that what I had done was unacceptable and that we needed to talk immediately. After that, he stopped leaving messages and just called over and over, the way people do when they are no longer trying to communicate and have started simply trying to exert pressure through repetition. Daniel called 4 times. Courtney called once, at 5:47, and did not leave a message. I made pasta again, same as Wednesday. I find repetition comforting when things around me are moving fast. The familiar sequence of boiling water and salt and the particular sound of dried pasta hitting the pot is grounding in a way I cannot fully explain but have stopped trying to. I ate at my kitchen table with the folder open in front of me, not reading it, just present with it, the way you might keep a hand on something solid when the ground feels unsteady. At 7:14, my phone buzzed with a text from a number I did not recognize. This is Gerald Whitmore. I am Courtney's father. I'd like to speak with you at your convenience. I will keep it brief. I set the fork down, Gerald Whitmore. Courtney's father from Greenwich, the CFO. I typed back, "Of course, I'm available now if you'd like to call." He called 40 seconds later. He had the voice of a man who has spent 30 years in boardrooms, not loud, not warm exactly, but precise, economical. The voice of someone who values his time and assumes you value yours. "Miss Mitchell," he said, "I'll be direct. Courtney shared the documents you presented this afternoon. I've spent the last 2 hours reviewing the Mitchell family's financial situation. I understand," I said, "the home equity position, the mortgage, the debt-to-income ratio." He paused. Not for effect. He was not a theatrical man. He paused the way people pause when they are choosing the most accurate word. "This is not a family that can underwrite a $90,000 wedding at Riverside Manor." "No," I said, "it is not." Another pause. "I want you to know that I don't hold you responsible for this situation. You presented accurate documentation of your own financial position. That is a reasonable thing to do." "Thank you. I do have one question." His voice did not change. "The balance on the brokerage statement, 340,000. Is that current?" "As of last Monday," I said. He made a sound that was not quite a word. An acknowledgement. The sound of a CFO absorbing a number and filing it accurately. "That's a well-managed account," he said. 11 years of index growth with no withdrawals. "My grandmother taught me to leave things alone when they're working," I said. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Courtney and I are going to have a conversation tonight. I suspect some plans will be changing." He did not say this with cruelty or with particular satisfaction. He said it the way you state a forecast. Accurately, without editorializing. "I understand," I said. "Good evening, Ms. Mitchell." "Good evening." The call lasted 4 minutes and 12 seconds. When it ended, I sat very still at my kitchen table for a long moment, listening to the street sounds coming through the window and the faint tick of the radiator warming up for the season. My father called again at 7:41. This time I picked up. He started speaking before I could say anything. A rapid, pressurized stream of words that had the quality of something that had been building since 4:30 and had finally found an outlet. He said I had embarrassed the family in front of everyone. He said Courtney's parents were now asking questions they had no business asking. He said I had taken a private family matter and made it into a spectacle. He said the word betrayal twice in the same sentence, which is a difficult grammatical construction, and which told me how agitated he was. I let him finish. Then I said, "Dad, I need you to listen to me for a minute." He stopped. The sudden silence on his end was almost louder than the words had been. "The account is mine," I said. "It has been mine since I was 21. That is not an opinion or an interpretation. It is the law. You sent me an email with a routing number and told me it was not optional. That email is now part of a legal file held by my attorney. The brokerage has a documented record of your attempt to access my account on Friday morning. That record exists regardless of what either of us does next, nothing from his end." I could hear him breathing. "I don't want to take this further," I said. "But that depends entirely on whether any further attempts are made to access, pressure, or misrepresent the ownership of my account. My attorney has prepared a cease and desist. I have not filed it yet. Whether I do is up to you." The breathing continued for another few seconds. Then my father said, in a voice I had never heard from him before, flattened, drained of its usual authority, like a recording of itself played at the wrong speed, "We needed that money, Lauren." "I know," I said. "We're in trouble." "I know that too." A long silence. Outside my window, a car went by playing music, and then it was gone and the street was quiet again. "You've known," he said. It was not a question. "For 14 months," I said. "Since the property review." He absorbed that. I could almost hear him doing it, recalibrating, restructuring, understanding that the daughter he had believed was uninformed and manageable had known about the home equity line and the mortgage and the debt-to-income ratio for over a year and had said nothing and waited. "Why didn't you say something?" he said. I thought about that question. I had thought about it before, in the 14 months since I had opened that file and seen my parents' financial situation laid out in the flat, unsentimentalizing language of mortgage documentation. I had asked myself whether I should have called them, whether I should have offered to help in some organized, boundaried way, whether silence had been the right response, Because you didn't ask me, I said finally. You never asked me. You assumed you could take what you needed when you needed it. That's different, another silence. Longer this time, then my father made a sound that I was not prepared for. Not words. A sound underneath words. The sound of a man who has held a particular version of himself together for a very long time and has just felt it give way in some fundamental, quiet, irreparable manner. I did not know what to do with that sound. I had prepared for anger, for escalation, for the next legal move. I had not prepared for this, Dad, I said. Nothing. You should talk to someone about the debt, I said. A financial advisor, a credit counselor. There are options that don't involve. I stopped, started again. There are people who can help you work through this properly. He did not respond. I heard him exhale, long and unsteady. I'm going to go now, I said. The cease and desist stays on file. If I don't hear anything further about the account, it stays there. That's where I'd like this to end. I ended the call. I sat at the kitchen table for a long time after that. The pasta had gone cold. The folder was still open in front of me. The UTMA document on top, my grandmother Eleanor's signature visible at the bottom of the page in her careful old-fashioned cursive. My phone did not ring again that night. Not from my father. Not from my mother. Not from Daniel. At 9:15, a text arrived from my cousin Rebecca. Heard the shower was eventful. Are you okay? I thought about that for a moment. Then I typed back, yes, I think I actually am. I meant it. In the specific, quiet, complicated way that you mean something true that has taken you a long time to be able to say. I closed the folder. I washed my plate. I turned off the kitchen light and stood for a moment in the dark of my apartment, listening to the city outside. And then I went to bed. 3 weeks later, Courtney called off the engagement. Courtney's decision came on a Tuesday, which felt appropriate somehow. The whole thing had started on a Tuesday. Pot roast and a piece of paper slid across a table and a family that believed it already knew how the story ended. It ended on a Tuesday too, quietly, with a phone call Courtney made to Daniel that lasted 19 minutes, and which I learned about, not from my family, but from my cousin Rebecca, who had it from her mother, who had it from my Aunt Carol, who had been present when my mother received the news. I was at my desk when Rebecca's text came through. I read it once, set my phone down, finished the paragraph I was writing in a client report, and then read it again. I did not feel the thing I thought I would feel. I had imagined, in the abstract, that learning the engagement was over would feel like a closing, a door shutting on a particular chapter, clean and final. What it actually felt like was more like watching a weather system that had been building for weeks finally make landfall. Not surprising. Not satisfying exactly. Just the arrival of something that had been coming for a long time. Gerald Whitmore had spent the 2 weeks following the bridal shower, conducting what I can only describe as a quiet, thorough, CFO-level audit of the Mitchell family's financial situation. I do not know the specific details of what he found or what conversations he had with Courtney during that time. I know only the outcome, that a woman who had planned a $90 Zirin wedding at Riverside Manor in March had decided, after examining the balance sheet of the family she was marrying into, that the numbers did not support the life she had been shown. I cannot judge her for that. I am a CPA. I understand, more than most, that numbers are not the whole of a life, but they are the structure underneath it, and a structure with $180,000 in concealed debt and no plan is a specific kind of structure with specific kinds of implications. Courtney's father had spent 30 years reading those implications for a living. His daughter had apparently learned to read them too. Daniel did not call me after the engagement ended. My mother did not call me. My father sent one text, 9 days after the shower, that said, "We've contacted a credit counseling service. I thought you should know." I read it twice and then typed back, "I'm glad. Thank you for telling me." That was the entirety of our exchange. And it contained more honest communication than most of the conversations we had managed in the previous decade. The Riverside Manor deposit, $22,000, non-refundable, was lost. I learned this also through the family network, through Rebecca, and I thought about it for a moment, and then thought about the routing number in my father's email and the word "not optional," and decided that the $22,000 was a tuition of a different kind. Some lessons arrive as deposits on venues that do not get used. That is not my fault, and it is not something I am going to carry. I spent November the way I spent most Novembers, working, running on Saturday mornings when the weather allowed, seeing friends I had been neglecting during the intensity of October. I had dinner with my attorney, Patricia Voss, in early November, not for professional reasons, but because she had asked and I had said yes, and it turned out she was excellent company. The kind of person who has spent decades seeing human behavior at its most pressurized and has emerged from that experience with an extremely dry sense of humor and very good taste in wine. She asked me over dessert how I was feeling about everything. I thought about it honestly before I answered, which is something I have been trying to do more consistently. Answer questions honestly rather than efficiently. Lighter, I said finally. I feel lighter. She nodded like that was the right answer. Maybe it was. In December, I made an appointment with a real estate attorney in Manhattan. I had been thinking about the apartment question for 2 years. Whether to keep renting, whether to buy, whether the market timing was right, whether I was ready to make that kind of commitment to a city and a life that was entirely mine. I had been thinking about it in the abstract, the way you think about things when they are possible but not yet pressing. After October, they became pressing. I found the apartment in January, Upper West Side, 2 bedrooms, the second of which I set up as an office with a desk facing the window and a bookshelf I assembled myself over the course of a Sunday afternoon with a glass of wine and a playlist my grandmother would not have recognized and would probably have tolerated. The building had a small roof deck. On clear days you could see the river. I closed on it in February. The down payment was $102,000 from the brokerage account, the first withdrawal I had ever made from it, 30 years after my grandmother, Eleanor, made the first deposit. I stood in the empty apartment on the afternoon of the closing, alone, in the specific silence of a space that is not yet inhabited, and I looked out the window at the river in the winter light. I thought about my grandmother's fireproof lockbox, the key she kept to herself until she was ready. The 3 things she told me from her hospice bed when I was 17, and grieving and not yet old enough to understand the full weight of what she was handing me. I understood it now, 8 months after the bridal shower at the Fairfield Country Club. The house in Fairfield went into default proceedings. My parents had engaged the credit counseling service, had restructured what they could, but the math of their situation did not allow for a clean resolution. The house, the 5-bedroom colonial, with the edged lawn and the clean windows and the kitchen renovation they were still paying off, was listed in the spring. It sold in June, under market, in the particular swift and undignified way that distressed properties sell when the owners are no longer in a position to wait for a better offer. I do not know where my parents are living now. I know they are in Connecticut, somewhere smaller, somewhere without the country club membership and the driveway wide enough for 2 cars. I know this through my Aunt Carol, who stays in touch with me in the careful, consistent way she has always operated, not taking sides, just remaining present on both ends of a family that has rearranged itself. Daniel is in Boston. He got a job there in the spring in sales, which is what he has always been suited for. He is charming and persistent and not particularly interested in details, which describes a certain kind of successful salesman and also describes every interaction I have ever had with him. We have not spoken. I do not know if we will. I hold that open, the way you hold open a door. You are not sure anyone is going to walk through, but which costs you nothing to leave unlocked. I was made a senior partner at my firm in April. The announcement came on a Thursday morning in an email from the managing director that I read 3 times before it felt real. I called Patricia Voss. I called my Aunt Carol. I stood in my office now, with my name on the door, and looked out the window at the Stamford skyline for a long moment. Then I went back to work, because that is what you do, and because the work had always been there, steady and requiring, and entirely mine. Long before the title caught up with it, the account sits at $241,000 now, after the down payment and the closing costs and a small investment in the firm I made when the partnership offer came with the option to buy in. I check it the way I check most things, regularly, without drama, with the quiet satisfaction of someone who has learned that patience and precision are not glamorous qualities, but they are durable ones. My grandmother Eleanor had both. She passed them to me the only way she knew how. Not through conversation, not through advice given freely, but through structure. Through a document filed in 1994 with a clause that transferred everything at 21. Through a fireproof lockbox and a key she kept until she was ready. Through the decision to build something and leave it alone, and trust that the person it was built for would know what to do with it when the time came. I knew what to do. I want to leave you with something I have been thinking about since October. There is a version of this story where I said yes at that dinner table, where I transferred the money, let the wedding happen, kept the peace the way I had always kept the peace, by making myself smaller and quieter and less expensive to the people around me. I know that version well. I lived adjacent to it for 32 years. The peace it would have bought was not peace. It was the temporary absence of conflict purchased at the cost of everything my grandmother spent 40 years building for me. It was compliance dressed as family loyalty, and I had worn that outfit long enough to know exactly how it fits, and exactly what it costs, and exactly what it does not give you in return. Dignity is not negotiable, not for a wedding, not for a deposit. Not for a family that has decided your worth is measured by your willingness to diminish yourself on their behalf. My grandmother knew that. She built it into the document. Now I know it too. If you have ever been the one who was expected to give and give and give while someone else was allowed to simply receive, I want you to know that I see you. Leave me a comment and tell me your story. And if this one meant something to you, hit like and subscribe, because there is more where this came from, and every single one of them is true.